Hey guys, in this session we will look into most frequently asked questions on incident response or alert analysis. My name is Anand Guru and I am here to help you clear your next SOC analyst job interview. So let's start. So first question is, how do you handle a malware alert? So when a malware alert is triggered, the very first stage of analysis would be information gathering, wherein we gather information like host name, user, file name, file path, malware name, malware category, file hash and antivirus action. And depending on the antivirus action, we will take appropriate action. For example, if the malware is deleted, then we try to identify the source of the malware. I mean, if there is no the priority of the incident is not high because the malware is already deleted, and we need to identify the source of the malware, in which case we typically check for the emails received by the user 2 to 4 hours before the malware detection, and then we'll do some kind of elimination. For example, we'll eliminate all the internal emails and we will see if there's any email with the attachments. So by doing so, we'll boil down to those 3 or 4 suspicious looking emails. We'll also check to see if the malware has been downloaded from any website. Again, proxy logs will be helpful here, and check the possibility that the malware detection could be on a USB. Typically this is done by looking at the drive letter in the file path of the malware detected event, right? So followed by that, we also do a research on the malware to see if it is a targeted attack or a commodity attack. For example, if the malware was trying to steal some information related to some financial sector, like say banking sector, and your company or your organization deals with the financial sectors, then that might actually be a targeted malware. And then we also check if the file hashes appear elsewhere in the network. Remediation would include, depending on the source of the malware, appropriate remediation steps will be taken. For example, if the malware was coming from email, then we need to take the permission, that is the exchange team will take the permission and delete all the emails from the sender or with the similar subject line. If the malware is coming from web, then we will block the URL on the proxy and IP address on the firewall. If it is coming from USB, we will educate the user about the malware and also kind of issue a warning. We also need to take care of the device control policies in the company. Now going back to the antivirus action, if the malware was not deleted, that is unhandled, not deleted or not quarantined, then the very first thing that we do is to raise an incident to manually remove the malware. Further, we continue the analysis and keep adding nodes to the incident. So because it was not deleted, there is a sense of urgency. The priority is high, maybe 2 depending on the machine infected. If it is a server, obviously it is P1, priority 1. If it is a user machine, it will be priority 2. Once we raise the incident, we continue our analysis and keep adding nodes to the incident. We check if the antivirus has up-to-date signatures or not, and also see if there is any file modifications or registry modifications, any user account creations and deletions, privilege escalations on the machine. Generally, we look at the overall audit logs of the affected host. We do this basically because the malware has been detected and is not deleted, and it is quite possible that the malware has half executed and it has made some changes. So we are trying to track them. And in this kind of incidents where the malware is detected and not deleted, the remediation would be to manually remove the malware and rescan the host. A follow-up question will be, how do you remove a malware manually? So we will download the Process Explorer and enable VirusTotal integration to it. We run the Process Explorer and look for malicious process. Identify the path of the process, and then the ideal thing is to kill the process now and delete the file from where it is running. But however, we cannot delete the file because the process is running, and if we try killing the process, it comes up immediately. So it is a deadlock situation there. You cannot delete the file and you cannot kill the process. So what we do at this point in time is boot the machine in safe mode. In safe mode, only minimum required Windows processes will run, thereby preventing the malware from executing. So at this point in time, we can delete the malicious file from the identified path. and later boot the machine in standard mode and run a full scan. Now there might be some questions as to should we remove the machine from the network. It depends on the host in question. If it is a critical server and there are no redundant servers, it is not appropriate to isolate it from the network immediately without having some backup plan. But however, if it's a user machine, then it's quite okay to isolate the machine immediately after a malware has been detected. Now, how do you work on a phishing alert? Typically, phishing alerts are reported using the plugin, using the Outlook plugin, wherein there will be a report phish button in most of the Outlooks, or a user might manually submit an email for phishing analysis to the SOC team. So when the email is received, the SOC team typically gets the email in the .msg format, and we gather this information from the mail. We look for, is the mail from public domain like Gmail, Yahoo, etc. And if it is coming from a specific company, is the domain name spelled correctly or not? So for example, like here it's amazon.com. Is the email poorly written, like say grammar mistakes and incorrect use of words, etc. So attackers do this in order to bypass standard filtering. Does the email create a sense of urgency? And if there are any links, we need to right click on the link and copy the URL, temporarily paste it on a notepad, copy the internet header of the email, and then copy the email to a sandbox and download attachments if any. Once we have gathered this information, we will get into our analysis. We submit the URL to URL void and check the reputation. Check the domain in whois lookup to identify the IP address of the domain. Check the reputation of the IP address at ipwide.com. Paste the internet header to MX toolbox and analyze the internet header. We need to check for DMARC, SPF and DKIM alignment and authentication. We need to also check for the return path and the reputation of the IP addresses, domain names, and also do a complete reputation check of all the IP addresses and domain names that appear in the header information. Remediation would be to block the domain at the email gateway and block the associated IP address at the firewall. If there are other copies of the email in other users' mailbox, take permission to delete them. Educate the user of the new technique used in the phishing email. How do you investigate a brute force attack? So when the brute force alert is triggered, we gather information like source IP addresses, destination IPs, username, logon type, logon failure reason, etc. And we'll check if the user is valid or not, and if it is a valid user, we'll see if the user account has higher privileges. And depending on the case, we check if the source IP address is local or remote, what is the destination IP address, that is where is the attack happening, how many source IP addresses are involved, and what is the frequency of attempts. Is it like we try to see if somebody is trying to enter the passwords manually or is it automated? The frequency typically helps us to identify that. We'll also look for failure reasons like say user account disabled or password is incorrect or account logged out, etc. The remediation for brute force attack would be to temporarily disable the user account, ask the user to change the password, and if external IP address is involved, block it on the firewall. How do you analyze a DOS attack? When the DOS alert is triggered, we need to gather the required information like source IP address and target IP address, and we will have to take a decision based on if the affected service is critical or public facing. If it is so, we need to access the service as a user to see if it is still up and running. Run netstat -an on the server to check if there are several connections in the wait state. Run continuous pings to see if there are any packet drops. Check the bandwidth consumption on the network monitoring tools like PRTG and Nagios. If the intensity is too high, open the bridge call. Remediation would involve opening a bridge call with the network team, ISP, application team, SOC lead and manager, and the server team. Temporarily add more servers to load balance the traffic. Reduce the connection wait time. That is, if somebody is doing a SYN flood attack, that can be reduced here. Limit the number of connections from an IP address or from a user. Block the top 5 or top 10 IP addresses that are aggressively involved in the attack, and prepare to bring up the disaster recovery servers if necessary. How to work on a ransomware alert. So when an alert is triggered, typically the logic of the correlation rule will be based on the IOC of a ransomware. So we need to gather the information like source IP addresses and IOCs, verify the credibility of the IOC using IBM X-Force or URL void to check the reputation and confidence level. Gather information like IP address, track the host name by DHCP. This is about the host where the infection has happened. Call the user and inform about the situation. Take remote and ensure the AV is running and has the latest signatures. Also look for any indication of a ransomware attack like file extension, inaccessible files, etc. If the alert is genuine, ask the user to disconnect from the network, open a ticket and assign it to the endpoint security team. Continue analysis to understand the source of the malware. Look for any other affected machines with the help of IOCs or source of malware. Remediation would involve identifying the type of ransomware and the stage of encryption. If it is in the early stage of encryption, try to identify the process and kill it. Do not reboot the machine as it might render the machine useless. If the files are already encrypted, try to look for decryption keys from reliable sources, typically from antivirus vendor websites. If it is a user machine, format it. If it is a server, format it and restore from the backup. Explain the analysis of a SQL injection attack. SQL injection attacks, typically the alerts come from IPS and WAF, and we gather information like the source IP addresses, log sources and severity. Check the reputation of the IP address. Check if the IP address was involved in any reconnaissance activity on our servers. Look for suspicious events on the database like configuration changes, strange queries, drop statement executed, etc. Also check to see if there is an increase in execution of select statement. Remediation would include to raise a ticket to block the IP on the firewall and also to expedite any patching process on the target server. Walk through the step you follow to analyze communication to bad reputation IP address alert. So whenever the alert triggers, like this can also be renamed as possible botnet activity, we gather information like source IP, destination port, log sources, and the devices involved, and the action of the device, like say firewall, IPS, and proxy action. Check the reputation of the public IP. Check its history and what kind of malicious activity, like say scanning CNC server, is it acting as a CNC server or is it pumping out spam emails? Check the destination port. If it is other than 80 and 443 and is allowed by firewall, raise a ticket and assign it to the firewall team to block the traffic. But typically, apart from 80, 443 and 53, none of the ports typically outbound is allowed. So we need to raise a ticket to block it. Check if the source host has the latest antivirus signature, because here we are suspecting that the source machine is infected with a botnet. So we need to check whether the antivirus is running there or not. And if it is running, we need to check the signature version. Identify the process involved in generating the traffic on the machine by using tools like TCP log view. Check if the IP address is associated with any other domain name or malware distribution. Right. So when we put the IP address, the IOC in VirusTotal or ThreatCrowd, we also get some associated artifacts like URL, file and file names, etc. Get the associated file hashes and check if they ever appeared in your network. Take the associated URL and domain name and see if they were visited by any of our users. Remediation would include, if the traffic is allowed, block the IP at firewall level. If it is done by a malware, remove it manually and run a full scan on the machine. Ensure all the configurations on the affected systems are intact. Ensure the associated URLs are blocked. Feed the associated file hashes to SIM to detect other attacks. IPS alert on a vulnerable host rule is triggered. How do you analyze it? So when the IPS alert on a vulnerable host is triggered, we gather information like source IP, destination port, IPS alert name, and severity. The analysis would include checking the reputation of the source IP address, check the IPS alert and understand what it means and the severity of the alert. See if there is an associated vulnerability to the alert. Right? So research on the vulnerability using the CVE number. Look for affected OS application and their version. Check if the target server is using the vulnerable version or not. Remediation would include raising a ticket to block the IP address on the firewall, raising a ticket to expedite the patching process on the target server. Tell us about the steps you take to analyze unknown process detected alert. When the alert is triggered, we gather information like source IP address, host name, process hash, process path, etc. Verify if a known malicious process by submitting the hash to virustotal.com. Right? If it is not a malicious process, check with the user if he has installed any new software or application and ask for business justification. If the user is not aware of the running process, the new process has to be analyzed. That is, a deep dive malware analysis has to be done to check if it is malicious. Remediation would include raise a ticket to block the IP address on the firewall and raise the ticket to expedite the patching process on the target server. That's it, guys, and let's meet again in the next session. Thank you.